The Justice Files. The Justice Files. The Justice Files. The Justice Files. You got no damn right. The Justice Files.
Disclaimer. The information in this video is not meant as legal advice and is not meant to harass anyone, but is an attempt to make a lawful private arrest according to the rule of law and during a time of secret societies and widespread official corruption. Some of the evidence presented is done under fair use that permits the use of copyrighted and other material to achieve a public benefit. I, Randy LaHoo, will continue hearing witness testimony in my internationally recognized common law court of record organized under the law of nations. I, Randy LaHoo, understand that I am still sworn to my oath of truth as I continue providing statements and information in this matter that seeks to effect a lawful arrest as part of a continuing common law fresh pursuit of known violators. Probable cause evidence, official oppression, and criminal conspiracy. The case, Cockpit Cafe versus City of Sanford, that was joined by another case, State of Maine versus Donald LaHoo, by virtue of a theory that retaliation was directed against me, Randy LaHoo, that forced the closure of the Cockpit Cafe, my employer in Sanford, Maine, and occurred because I helped Donald LaHoo expose judicial and other corruption within the state of Maine. Since 2014, I've been trying to get answers from my government officials and to have an investigation done into the allegations that I raised about criminal conduct occurring within the court system. To date, no law enforcement agency has shown an interest in accepting the evidence or doing an investigation, or at least they've not allowed me to participate in the investigation or to be informed as to what steps are being taken to investigate. Trying to do my own investigation has been difficult at best. Trying to get records. I've only made a few attempts to get records, but when you try to get records, they either don't answer. Part of the problem whereby the Cockpit Cafe lease required the owner to get records. And if you can't get the records because the city refuses to give them, then you have to go to the Alfred Superior Court to try to get those records. But if there's a corrupt conspiratorial linkage between the players, you're not going to get the records that you need to defend yourself. And it also says in the lease that any disputes have to be solved at the Alfred Superior Court. So again, if there's a unhealthy relationship between the players, you're not going to get justice. So to further investigate, I believe that's an indication that the Maine system of justice is broken and unworkable for the people of Maine, the regular people of Maine. And to further investigate that concern, back in August 6, 2018, Renee Bernier and I went around trying to get someone to accept the complaint and the evidence of the complaint. We had it in a package. We had all the information you needed to do a good beginning investigation. We were not able to get anybody to even accept our evidence. So we came home and I was very frustrated, so on her behalf I emailed the Maine Attorney General's office, and I got an immediate reply from Brian McMaster, Chief of Investigations in the Office of the Maine Attorney General. The summary of the complaint or question reads, I have assembled a packaged complaint identifying information and evidence of recognized crimes from Maine Title 17A, which is the criminal code, that I tried to present to the Maine District Court per Maine Title 15. I was told to bring it to the Maine District Attorney's Office. This I did and was then told to present it to law enforcement. I then brought the package to the Sheriff's Office and was told I could not file it directly with them, but rather I needed to have an attorney present the complaint to the Sheriff's Office. This seems outrageous and ridiculous to me, since it means that it is impossible for me alone to act upon the see something, say something rule for reporting suspected crime unless I spend an unknown sum of money on an attorney who in turn can report said crime that I believe I've witnessed and fallen victim to. I have already reported the evidence to federal authorities, and I also filed my complaint with the Maine Human Rights Commission and was given a case number. That Maine Human Rights Commission contact alone, however, has not been enough to stop the bad behavior being perpetrated against me. Is it true that I need to go through an attorney in order to report suspected crime? Does the Maine Human Rights Commission present my complaint information to law enforcement for investigation on my behalf? If so, then why haven't I been contacted by law enforcement personnel on the matter? Is this truly the only process in Maine for reporting suspected crime? How does Maine law protect me from further mistreatment under this type of system? Brian McMaster, Chief of Investigations at the Maine Attorney General's Office, replied to only two of the questions. One answer was, you do not have to have an attorney to file a complaint with law enforcement. The second answer was, the Maine Human Rights Commission will not refer a complaint of law enforcement. That sounds ridiculous to me, because anybody that knows of a crime occurring has an obligation to at least make sure that there's an investigation being done on it. Being concerned that the Maine system of justice was broken and unworkable, I assembled 6 videos and put them on YouTube for law enforcement or anybody else to review, to see the evidence that I've assembled, and to tell me if I'm right or I'm wrong. And to date, no one has disputed any of the evidence I've assembled. Being frustrated again that the Maine system of justice is broken and unworkable, I again reached out to Brian McMaster, Chief of Investigations in the Office of the Maine Attorney General's Office, on February 13th, 2020. Attached to my email were 3 attachments. One was the original email and response that I got from Brian McMaster. The 2 was my 2016 March 7th draft report on government-enforced common law barratry, a 70-page document. And third was the cover of Donald LaHoo's invoking private attorney general status, having a stamp from the Maine Attorney General. The email reads, Dear Sir, despite the efforts of myself and others, similarly affected. Collectively, we've been unable to get law enforcement to accept and act upon our probable cause evidence of official corruption and Class B crimes. That makes the Maine system of justice broken and unworkable for us. I've included the attached files that's part of my probable cause evidence for your reference. If you have a dispute with any part of the evidence, then please let me know so that I can correct my understanding. I don't wish to use force. Rather, I seek to use the Maine system of justice, but it's broken and unworkable. The evidence shows this to be a fact. Even you, sir, did not offer any follow-up questions or concerns that would have given us the impression that you are any less broken and unworkable in fighting official corruption. You can change that impression by actively investigating these complaints. Failure to do so will clearly be an indication of highly suspicious behavior and will only reaffirm that the Maine system of justice is indeed broken and unworkable for those not officially or otherwise corruptly connected. I've also assembled video evidence and made it available online for your consideration. I've posted the links below for your convenience. If you, sir, refuse to or are unable to provide a workable system of justice in these matters, then please at least have the decency to give me your official notice that you have refused jurisdiction and instead have transferred jurisdiction to me so that I may make the arrest myself. Because I am ill-prepared for such an assignment, the rules of necessity are the only rules that can reasonably be applied to my common law fresh pursuit. By transferring jurisdiction under these circumstances, sir, you must of course understand the potentially dangerous situation it's likely to cause. For example, it's stupid to, on one hand, have a law that says people in their private capacities who witness serious crimes may make a warrantless arrest. Maine Title 17A Section 6. But on the other hand, to also say that someone being placed under arrest may resist that arrest. Maine Title 17A Section 751-B.2. If they believe that the one making the arrest is not in law enforcement. Under the common law fresh pursuit, a felony arrest is proper in order to protect the safety of the public. So just how was that supposed to be done when the violators may resist to the point of escape whereby they may destroy evidence as was done in these matters? Because the police refused to make the arrest, does that common law obligation or statutory obligation to protect the safety of the public stop? Obviously it does not. In these instant matters, however, the law enforcers have refused to even accept the evidence, let alone make an arrest. That constitutes a criminal conspiracy as I read the law, Maine Title 17A Section 151 and Maine Title 17A Section 608 Official Oppression. As Chief of Investigations in the Office of the Attorney General, you would have the legal understanding to know how to proceed in these matters. I look to you for guidance, not reluctance. Can I count on your support to bring into effect a proper criminal investigation into these matters? Or, if you have no dispute with the sufficiency of the evidence and are refusing to investigate, then are you transferring to me in writing full jurisdiction to pursue these violators under the rules of necessity that know no law? Signed sincerely, Randy Alfred LaHoo, Deputy Private Attorney General, activated April 7, 2015 under Donald Brian LaHoo, Private Attorney General. After receiving no reply from Brian McMaster, Chief of Investigations, Maine Attorney Generals, I wrote once again to Brian McMaster and forwarded my message to the Maine representatives from the independent, it's not independent party, but the independent representatives of the Maine legislature, again, who I could find an email address for. And I did that on February 15th, 2020. I wrote further, "Dear Mainers, please help me. I'm trying to find someone in law enforcement who will accept my probable cause evidence of serious criminal conduct and who will do an honest investigation into these allegations. So far, I can't find even one, despite the vast amounts of resources being spent for the purpose of fighting crime here in Maine. Either find me an honest cop or direct the resources to my common law fresh pursuit of known violators. None of the evidence I've presented is in dispute and demonstrates that the public is in danger." Also on February 15th, I sent that same email to all of the Maine representatives of the Republican Party that I could find an email address for. But again, I received no reply. On February 17th, after receiving a notice from the Sanford GOP, I forwarded that email to the Sanford GOP. No one replied. On February 19th, I got an email from the Maine House Republicans, and I forwarded that email to the Maine House Republicans, and again received no reply. Still being frustrated and more convinced than ever that the Maine system of justice is indeed broken and unworkable for the regular people of Maine, on February 22nd, I sent another email to, at one point I sent an email, this again I forwarded the other email, I recall doing it, I don't have it here, but to the Maine Senate Republicans, who I could find an email address for, and again no one replied. So on February 22nd, I sent the following message to the Maine Democrat legislators in the House of Representatives, who I could find an email address for. I got a couple of replies that were automatic replies, but I've gotten no intelligent responses. The email reads, perhaps you can understand why I didn't get a response. I believe everything in here is true, and that's why I didn't get the response. The email reads, "Dear Mainers, please help me. I'm trying to find someone in law enforcement who will accept my probable cause evidence of serious criminal conduct occurring in Sanford, Maine, and who will do an honest investigation into these allegations. So far, I can't find even one, despite the vast amounts of resources being spent for the purpose of fighting crime here in Maine. Either find me an honest cop or direct the resources to my common law fresh pursuit of known violators. None of the evidence I've presented is in dispute, and demonstrates that the public is in danger from voter fraud, billing fraud, and government-enforced common law barratry. It's been 1 week since emailing this complaint to the Maine Attorney General's office and to some of the Maine Republican legislators, and no one has emailed me to dispute my evidence. How can Maine people know with certainty that the votes from public elections are counted properly when the police and legislature refuse to stop official corruption? Oh, that's right. You don't have to answer because you're government. As you folks in law enforcement and the legislature refuse to provide hope and guidance in the matters of immediate and ongoing official corruption, and continue instead to make possible the extortion of the people of their limited resources, you are in fact waging war against them under your made-up rules of necessity. We have to fund this and have to fund that, and we need to tax the people to do it. Well, the legislature funded law enforcement, and law enforcement refuses to give me any assurance that the concerns I'm raising are being investigated. President Donald J. Trump was to be impeached not for any crime, but for merely violating the public trust. What the hell is going on here, people are asking. Take a look in the mirror and you'll see that it's two wings on the same bird. You people suck for not getting back to me in my time of need. I won't despair, however, because I've found a solution to solve government corruption once and for all. And it can be done without violence, but rather by calling a spade a spade. Words have meaning, so let's use the right words and apply them to their right meanings. For example, a sovereign human exists and is materially different when compared to a person. Yet, when arrested, the person and the sovereign human are taken as one component, despite their obvious differences. Former Alfred Superior Court Justice Paul A. Fritzsche said in State of Maine versus Donald LaHoo, the government has to have a way to enforce its laws. And it's okay if we don't like the law, we still have to follow the law. So hey Fritzsche, what happened to the 56 minutes of transcripts from November 10, 2014 jury selection portion? And hey Maine Law Court, when are you going to release the trial court records on that case? Oh wait, isn't that obstruction of justice and tampering with official records, etc., etc., ad nauseum? How is your active retired status working out for you? Was that early retirement because of wrongdoing by you on the case? Doesn't the policeman or the prosecutor woman or judge know the difference between people and their persons? Shouldn't that be part of any Miranda right warning whereby we can all agree that there's a material difference between a sovereign human and a person in terms of jurisdiction and their common law right to informed consent when contracting? The current legal fiction that's a constructive consent of the person against the will of the sovereign human is extortion through threats of violence and ignorance. How do I know this? Let's consider the Constitution and the definition that a county is a person. So if a county is a person, then its employees could no longer be sovereign, but would have to be in their person. But a sovereign remains a sovereign because a sovereign was not considered to be a person. So in that framework, statutory law and the Constitution isn't a restrictive box that was born out of common law principles and practices with a force of trust sufficient to secure the people's treasures against all enemies, declaring those who serve her to be their slaves. An off with your heads kind of trust. But we have regular employees and we don't make them swear an oath. But we consider that persons are slaves. Well, who would be more of a slave as an employee than someone who's taken an oath? I hire you to babysit my kids, and I get to look in on my kids according to my will and my desire. But the way the Constitution is currently run, sovereign humans have been put inside the box of statutory law as persons. That's ridiculous. When you consider that the Constitution fits more like an employee handbook. The Constitution, however, was drawn up by druids and tricksters to benefit themselves at the expense of their victims. Essentially saying, you can't see your kids right now because I'm the babysitter, and you trust me despite my corruption and contempt for you. Cameras, however, make druids squirm when in the light of transparency the principles of due process, truth, and fairness override the temptation to duel with violence. But unfortunately for the corrupt druids, constitutional protections for all must be applied equally as written. Something they can't do by blood oath. The public position versus the private position of always helping a blood brother, whether he's right or wrong, becomes more obvious. You see that occurring throughout government, the media, and everywhere when stupid is deemed the right approach to handling matters in secret, but result in the lessening of our civilized society that government servants swore to uphold but just can't uphold because, along with their titles of nobility, they serve two masters and operate in secret chambers. The Maine Constitution still prohibits such titles of nobility, but corruption makes it possible. People in dispute used to engage in the duel. That was messy and was replaced by the writ of right and equal protection under the law and due process of law. He who proceeds following the usual process is not deemed to use force. Those who do use force and get away with it under color of law are Maine judges who have instead replaced the duel with extortion and no process at all, while the governor and the legislature stand and applaud, spending feverishly on their favorite projects as if on a high from the blood of the extorted. That's sick. We see numerous examples of this on YouTube, the forcing of homeless sovereign human people to accept extortion from police when they're treated as statutory persons. That's sick and a crime against humanity. People get cold, persons don't. People go hungry, persons don't. It's also proof that the public education system has failed them to a degree that's unconscionable as a scheme to defraud on a mass scale. But that's what Druidism brings to civilized society, destruction from within for the good of the few and at the expense of the many. Still not convinced that people have the rightful authority and jurisdiction to refuse to contract under statutory law, or to prosecute government crimes under common law? Compare the definitions for the word person and ask yourself a simple question relating to trust. When is it proper for a parent to give legal custody of their children to the babysitter? Never, right? Instead, we trust our children into the care of the babysitter, but we don't relinquish legal custody. So who would create a trust and give full legal custody over their precious treasures to the trustee? Nobody. Yet we see government enacting policies that do just that. That's like the slaves or the babysitter using force to separate the people from their children or their treasures, guided by the internal policies that govern the people's slaves, the babysitters. That's stupid, brought about by brainwashing and mind control. Need more proof? Again, let's consider that a county, Black's Law Dictionary, 4th edition, under the definition of person, a county is a person, but a sovereign is not. An Indian is a person, and a slave was so considered. If a county is a person, then its employees could no longer be sovereign, but rather are in their persons as slaves to the people inside what has become the magic box of the Druids, where all people and persons are kept against their will and without their informed consent. These employees are not regular employees. They're sworn to the people's solemn oath. Slaves. What are the rules regulating slaves who don't do their job? Who disrespect their masters and act out of line? The statutory law enforcement person is sworn in as an instrument of government and is restricted by constitutional provisions and statutory jurisdiction. It is the private sovereign deputized to serve under the enslavement of the solemn oath, as in having a license to oversee the other solemnly sworn slaves, unless the sovereign human consents through their own free will, and such consent is not like submitting to being raped when overpowered by force or submission. It was stated in the case Yik Wu versus Hopkins that when we consider the nature and theory of our institutions of government, the principles on which they are supposed to rest, and review the history of their development, we are constrained to conclude that they do not mean to leave room for the play and action of purely personal arbitrary power. Sovereignty itself, of course, is not subject to law, for it is the author and source of law. But in our system, while sovereign powers are delegated to the agencies of government, sovereignty itself remains with the people, by whom and for whom all government exists and acts, and the law is the definition and limitation of power. So a sovereign is not a person subject to statutory law, despite what Judge Fritzsche said in the trial of State of Maine versus Donald LaHoo. The law court in the appeal from Donald LaHoo got it wrong when it said that a person cannot represent another person. That's foolish. Show me a piece of paper that can represent itself. They have no human existence to facilitate anything and will even blow away in the wind. It's the talk of the Druids. When asked by police and prosecutors to state their names, sovereign humans have an absolute right to refuse to contract because they exist outside of the jurisdiction of the magic druid box called statutory law, since common law is contrary to statutory law. We know this because as administrators over the person, sovereign humans are permitted by due process to give the requesting government official the license or other paperwork and to say, I'm the administrator sovereign and not the person you seek. I permit you to question the paperwork if you wish. That would be well within the sovereign human's right to do so, and the government official must respect that as the wish and command of the sovereign human who wishes not to contract, and who exists outside of the statutory realm, now under the control of the corrupt druids. Although completely biased by the conflict of interest that would imprison them for this deceptive business model, statutory courts are permitted to avoid prosecution for their crimes against humanity by falsely claiming that a persona can represent themselves but can't represent others who are considered third parties. That's false, because a person is a legal or commercial entity. Only humans created by God have a brain and the capacity to represent themselves, so it's part of the illusion to say that you are both the human and the persona. You will notice that in statutory courts they have no Bible to swear in on, and won't swear themselves in to tell the truth and the whole truth under God. Taking off the mask and making government officials question the mask goes to the heart of a sovereign human's right of contract, because no form of constructive consent should make free people the entertainment for secret society schemes and artifices to defraud. You won't find the words people, sovereign, or human in any statute unless attached to the words person, like natural person. It's just an illusion like smoke from their rears. The gun in your face makes it seem lawful, but you are not permitted to duel with the extorters because you must use due process. Why don't they use due process? The extorters, on the other hand, can shout, "Officer safety," and shoot the human to death, while making the people pay for their administrative leave and defense. That's sick. The fact that such behavior is against the peace and civil order of due process when there is no human victim should be a clue that force is being applied in a manner that is criminal in nature. Yet the legislature pumps in more funding to enhance these types of crimes against humanity. Raise taxes to fund the extortion of people? Hell yes, but investigate official corruption? Hell no. People have a right to not be extorted by the schemes of their babysitters and trustees. And when they are extorted, that should be exculpatory evidence for any defending party. But again, what punishments were appropriate for slaves? Recognizing people as people and not as instruments of exploitation will help to prevent violent encounters between people and the police, because there's a certain amount of liability that goes to those who conceal these facts and let the violence occur. Was this the legislature's intent? Can anyone deny that such extortion is occurring with the blessing of the slaves overseeing the people's trust? Let me know if you dare, but you do have a right to remain silent if you agree that you're involved in spreading these crimes against humanity. Silence is all that I've gotten from those that I've contacted so far. It comes down to silence equals the fraud of cowards or criminals. Speak up or accept that these are undisputed facts. So when we as humans are charged by the people's slaves in courts created by the people's slaves, that's the magic box of statutory jurisdiction. That's a court created by statute and not a constitutional court. Statutory courts have jurisdiction over persons who are employees of the state. A county is a person, a sovereign is not. Crimes committed by the slaves that harm the sovereign human must be handled under the common law of trust, or the slaves will have direct impact over the procedures and process. That's a conflict of interest, not something they're not used to. The trustee can't rewrite the rules to govern the affairs of trustors and beneficiaries without their informed consent, as they are only employees that are sworn slaves of the people's wishes, and as such are constrained by the articles and declarations of the trust. It's sort of like an employee handbook for government employees under a fictitious name. Still not convinced that people have the rightful authority and jurisdiction to refuse to contract under statutory law or to prosecute government crimes under common law? We could get some clarification on these matters if Brian McMaster, Chief of Investigations in the Office of the Attorney General, would respond to this complaint. No word yet has come from Maine's Chief of Investigations, however. McMaster seems like somebody already on the people's payroll who would have the legal understanding to know how to proceed in these matters of official corruption. But instead of providing guidance, he's provided only silence. What a waste of resources when silence equals fraud. McMaster has chosen to remain silent on the matter of sovereign humans having a right to resist arrest if they believe that the arresting party is not law enforcement, but rather just an individual in a police uniform. He chooses to remain silent on whether people can arrest police officers who are breaking the law while on duty. It's not like someone is resorting to the duel. Rather, the private sovereign tells the police, based upon the probable cause evidence, that they are under arrest, and the police, out of respect for the law and the civil order, complies with the arresting party. We know when we've done something wrong. Remember the saying, "Man up," from the TV show Cops? You did wrong and got caught, so put down your guns and man up, bad cop, bad cop. That's what you're gonna do when they come for you, because the duel has been replaced with due process. As the weeks and months go by, if not a one of you has replied, I won't despair from the silence of assholes. Keep our guns ready, but focus your battles. Gangs of slaves have raised arms against us, bypassing the duel in our cherished due process. God's gift is given to you in His creation. No person can rule over that sovereign station. The republic will thrive and corruption will die, as no person may rule over the sovereign's mind. It comes down to the inherent ignorance embedded in each of the parties as to the material differences that exist between the definitions sovereign human and person, that is a legal or commercial entity. Sovereign people who are subject to the common law are different and distinct from persons who are subject to both the common law and the statutory law, as slaves. And the trustee must have a handbook to manage the affair of its employee slaves. Sovereign humans who are represented by an attorney are no longer considered as sovereign humans and are subject to the statutory law or whatever else the representing attorney decides on your behalf. All common law courts are closed and need to be reopened by the will of the people to prosecute this official misconduct. They can't be left to investigate themselves anymore. This power structure is consistent with that of the common law trust and babysitting. How did it get so out of touch with reality? Still not convinced that sovereign human people are not subject to statutory law? There is an extensive history of sovereign immunity as a matter of right under the common law that was subsequently affirmed in Chisholm v. Georgia. It said, at the Revolution, the sovereignty devolved on the people, and they are truly the sovereigns of the country, but they are sovereigns without subjects, with none to govern but themselves. In Nevada v. Hall, it says the immunity of a truly independent sovereign from suit in its own courts has been enjoyed as a matter of absolute right for centuries. Only the sovereign's own consent could qualify the absolute character of that immunity, but they've taken informed consent and converted it and exploited it with constructive consent. That is a legal fiction. In Alden v. Maine, it says that Maine adheres to the general rule that a specific legislative enactment is required to waive sovereign immunity. When humans are prosecuted in the statutory courts as persons, that's barratry, because they're prosecuting the persona of, for example, Randy LaHoo through the license or birth certificate, and not the human sovereign Randy LaHoo. The state has the burden of proving jurisdiction once challenged. Sovereign human Randy LaHoo is the administrator over the affairs of Randy LaHoo the persona, and can't make the persona raise their hand any more than any prosecutor who has the burden of making Randy LaHoo the person raise his hands, answer questions, etc. So all questions must go through Randy LaHoo the persona. Only Randy LaHoo, the sovereign, has the power. But not if they don't know that there's a difference. But you can't make sense out of an illusion unless you understand the trick and can pull the strings for all to see that it is in fact just a trick. And the prosecutor can't make a persona sign anything, or answer any question, or to perform any task. But hey, letting them try if they wish is fine so long as they pay us for our time. As this is frivolous prosecution, that's common law barratry. The American concept that all power is inherent in people is now proven by the simple definition of person. Anyone ready to dispute these facts? Speak up now, or you are letting the world know that finally the people have taken their proper roles as masters over their own destinies and trust assets. Why should the master be required to ask the slave for permission to do anything when sovereignty is the power to do anything within a state without accountability? The alleged law enforcers and their shiny badges and pressed uniforms who engage people with the intention of getting paid for their extortion are committing crimes against humans. However, when people ask these same individuals for services they've already paid for, like investigating official corruption, they refuse and expect not to be prosecuted. The silence coming from the Maine Attorney General's office and from the state legislature demonstrates that they're all right with that silence despite it being a crime too. Try getting the slaves to prosecute the slaves, and the corrupt system makes excuses and refuses, saying that they have a right to self-police their own levels of corruption. Oh sure, once in a while a few bad apples get juiced, but that seems to only reinforce the corruption, as is evident in these instant matters. Just like any secret society that has hidden loyalties going against the will of the people. When people refuse to be extorted, that is their right to do so, unless presented with a victim statement as justifiable probable cause for the arrest. Instead, the Druids will arrest the sovereign human who's tricked into making false statements like, yes, I am not a human, but rather a piece of paper, legal or commercial entity subject to statutory law. But those same people are not charged for the obvious false statements that are proven false by virtue of the material difference between people and persons. Hence the confusion and despair that surrounds an arrest by Druids. If the actions don't fit the crime, someone along the process will lose the paperwork, change a few statements to better fit the narrative, threaten a witness or defendant into not showing up for court. It's all good and no one of the slaves is punished because they investigate themselves in secret chambers. They have all the guns and can spy on and gang stalk every American. Everyone in government should be inspected to ensure that they're not under the control of electronic control devices. So the best thing people can do to shut down these Druid individuals in state of Maine uniforms is to make them pay us for our private time. When confronted by these Druid bullies, simply say the following: I don't consent to these proceedings, and I do not consent to contract for your services under statutory law. I do not work for government, but if you wish to contest the decision of this sovereign court, then I will schedule a hearing for your case upon payment of the fee. Set your own fee, $1 million per hour in 1 hour blocks, or whatever you wish to be paid, as my time is my livelihood. Otherwise, step out. Do you understand? The word understands means that you accept, you consent. Just as the police will charge you for their time, if they take up your time from that point forward, you should expect to be paid for the first hour at least. Pay or go away, slave. None of us needs phony police, phony governors, and phony legislators. Vote for me. I'm another corrupt phony. Don't ask me to investigate official corruption because I might get caught. I'm trying to get my son or daughter in on this phony scam too because we care about turning people into targets of opportunity. I'm helping the people by funding more dumbed-down programs in our public schools so that we few selected ones can all work for government and retire rich at an early age. Then I'm going to go into the legislature and pass more extortionist measures to further extort the people as persons. Vote for me. I suck at fighting official corruption, but I'm good at extorting people. I'm still waiting for a reply, Brian McMaster, Republicans, Democrats. Is anyone going to investigate these crimes of official corruption here in Sanford? Or are you pleading your Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination? Hello? Is anybody out there? Or is this just going to be another episode of the Druids Masonic Show? I'm hoping for the investigation, but the smart bet is on seeing a new season of the show and more phony voting. More phony bills. More phony statements of you must, you must. P.S. Let's get some real law enforcement people looking at these rogue babysitters and start up some common law courts to add teeth into prosecuting these crimes that are against the public trust and civil order. And people, please remember that a sovereign human is not a person subject to any statutory law without their informed consent. That fact is not in dispute. If they want to question the person, persons can't speak. Persons can't do anything without the sovereign's informed consent and will. Sovereign humans don't have a legal or moral duty to speak to the corrupt police. Whereby silence of government officials can only be equated with fraud when there's a legal or moral duty to speak, or when an inquiry left unanswered would be intentionally misleading. We cannot condone this shocking conduct. If that is the case, we hope our message is clear, Brian McMaster, Republicans, Democrats. This sort of deception will not be tolerated, and if this is routine, it should be corrected immediately. But still, the show plays on. That's the Justice Files. Please like, share, and subscribe.
The Justice Files. The Justice Files. The Justice Files. The Justice Files. You got no damn right.